Have you ever stepped barefoot onto a lawn in the early morning and felt the cool, damp soil give slightly beneath you? It seems like an ordinary moment, but just below that green surface, a quiet struggle is taking place. For many years, I looked at my own garden in the simplest possible way. There were the plants I wanted to protect, and there were the stubborn weeds I wanted gone. I bought bottles of synthetic weed killer, sprayed them beneath the hot sun, and watched dandelion leaves curl, darken, and disappear. Yet every spring, those weeds returned, often stronger and more numerous than before. I felt trapped in a cycle of chemicals, short-lived success, and the same problem coming back again. Then one day, I stopped fighting. More accurately, I stopped fighting against nature and began paying attention to how she works. What if I told you that an ordinary-looking organic powder, sold in simple agricultural bags, can perform two completely opposite jobs at the same time? At first, the idea sounds almost impossible. It can feed established grass with organic nitrogen, helping the lawn develop a deeper, richer green. At the same time, it can prevent newly germinating weed seedlings from developing the roots they need to survive. It does not work by poisoning the seed or scorching the soil. Its action is far more subtle. A weed seed can absorb moisture, awaken, split open, and begin sending a young root into the earth. But at that vulnerable stage, root development is interrupted. Without a functioning root system, the seedling cannot reach water or nutrients. It eventually dries out and returns to the soil, while the established grass continues to grow denser, stronger, and better able to cover the open spaces where weeds usually gain a foothold. I understand why this sounds like a miracle product or a late-night advertisement promising impossible results, but this is where the story becomes worth exploring. Beneath the claim is a fascinating lesson in soil science, plant development, and timing. Used correctly, this approach may reduce the need for repeated chemical treatments while feeding the lawn and supporting a healthier growing environment. So settle in with a cup of tea and let me show you how a simple golden byproduct of corn processing can nourish established grass while stopping many annual weeds before they ever become visible. Part 1. The Accidental Revelation, 1986. Some of the most important discoveries in agriculture do not begin with a dramatic plan. They begin with an unexpected result. In the spring of 1986, turfgrass researcher Dr. Nick Christians was working at Iowa State University on a project unrelated to weed control. His goal was to find a natural material that might help suppress fungal disease on golf course greens. He tested several organic byproducts, looking for something that could support healthy turf without relying entirely on conventional fungicides. One of the materials spread across his research plots was a yellow, protein-rich byproduct left over from corn processing. As the days passed, Dr. Christians noticed something unusual. The grass in the treated plots remained healthy and developed a strong, deep green appearance. But that was not the most surprising result. The exposed soil between the grass plants stayed remarkably clear. In the nearby untreated plots, weeds were sprouting in dense, disorderly patches. In the plots covered with the yellow corn material, the established turf looked vigorous, while very few new weeds appeared in the open soil. A careful researcher does not dismiss an unexpected observation. Dr. Christians did not treat it as coincidence and move on. Instead, he spent the following years studying the effect in laboratories and field trials at Iowa State. He wanted to understand why a single agricultural byproduct could appear to behave in two opposite ways. How could it feed established turf and, at the same time, interfere with newly germinating weed seedlings? When I first learned about this work, it changed the way I thought about lawn care. We often search for increasingly complex industrial products when a useful answer may already exist inside an agricultural process. This discovery was not built around a flashy bottle or a monthly chemical program. It came from observing how a humble farm byproduct interacted with grass, seeds, moisture, and soil. That is what makes the story so valuable. A result that began in a research plot in 1986 eventually offered homeowners and gardeners a completely different way to think about weed prevention. Instead of waiting for weeds to mature and then trying to kill them, we could work earlier, during the brief stage when a germinating seed is most vulnerable. Part 2. The Biochemical Double Agent. So what exactly is this mysterious golden powder? It is not baking soda, which is sometimes discussed in relation to soil pH. It is not ferrous sulfate, which may be used in certain lawn products to damage some broadleaf weeds. The material is corn gluten meal. This distinction matters because corn gluten meal is not the same as the corn meal used for baking. It is not cornstarch, corn flour, or a bag of ground corn from the grocery store. Corn gluten meal is a concentrated, protein-rich byproduct produced during the wet milling of corn. During that process, corn kernels are soaked, ground, and separated into different components used for starches, sweeteners, oils, and animal feeds. The protein-rich fraction is collected, dried, and ground into the familiar golden yellow meal used in agriculture. High-quality corn gluten meal commonly contains around 10% nitrogen by weight. That makes it more than a weed management tool. It also acts as an organic nitrogen fertilizer. Once it is spread on the soil, microorganisms begin breaking down its complex proteins. As decomposition continues, nitrogen is released gradually and becomes available to the grass over time. This slower biological release can support steady growth without the sudden surge, sometimes produced by highly soluble fertilizers. The most interesting part, however, is what happens during seed germination. Corn gluten meal contains naturally occurring protein compounds and peptides, which are short chains of amino acids. When a weed seed receives enough moisture, it begins germinating. The seed coat opens, stored energy is activated, and a tiny embryonic root emerges into the soil. Under normal conditions, that first root lengthens, anchors the seedling, and begins forming smaller secondary roots. Those roots are essential because they allow the young plant to absorb water and nutrients after the seed's stored reserves begin running out. But when the newly emerging roots are exposed to the active compounds associated with corn gluten meal, normal root development can be inhibited. The primary root may fail to lengthen properly, and secondary roots may not form as they should. Picture what that means for the seedling. It has already spent much of its limited stored energy opening the seed and beginning growth. A small shoot may start to appear, but the root system cannot develop well enough to support it. The seedling cannot anchor itself effectively, gather adequate moisture, or reach the nutrients around it. Without a period of favorable moisture to rescue it, the young plant weakens and dies before it can become an established weed. Mature grass responds differently because its root system already exists. Established turf has a network of developed roots extending through the soil. Those roots are no longer in the fragile germination stage targeted by the pre-emergent effect. Instead, the grass benefits from the nitrogen released as soil organisms digest the corn gluten meal. That is the remarkable double action. The same material can interfere with the earliest root growth of germinating seeds while providing nitrogen to established grass. One application, two very different biological outcomes. Part 3. The clock of nature. The art of timing. This is the point where honesty becomes essential. Read enough reviews of corn gluten meal and you will notice a sharp divide. Some gardeners describe it as one of the most useful tools in organic lawn care. Others say it did nothing at all. A few even report that their weeds grew faster after application. Why can the same product produce such different experiences? The answer is timing. Corn gluten meal is a pre-emergent treatment. That word, pre-emergent, is the key to understanding the entire method. It must be present during the narrow period when a weed seed has begun germinating but has not yet developed a functioning root system. It will not remove mature weeds. It will not make an established dandelion, clover plant, or crabgrass clump disappear. Once a weed has formed a working root system, the vulnerable stage has passed. And because corn gluten meal contains nitrogen, applying it after weeds are established may feed them along with the lawn. Instead of weakening those plants, you may encourage faster, thicker growth. This is the mistake behind many disappointing results. The product is spread after the weeds are already visible, when the opportunity for pre-emergent control has largely been missed. The user then sees vigorous weed growth and concludes that the material failed, when the real problem was the application window. Successful use requires learning to read the seasonal signals around you. A date printed on a calendar can provide a rough guide, but soil temperature is more dependable because weed seeds respond to conditions in the ground, not to the names of our months. For a spring treatment aimed at summer annual weeds such as crabgrass, goosegrass, and spurge, the traditional target is when soil temperature near a depth of 4 inches approaches 55 degrees Fahrenheit. A soil thermometer offers the clearest measurement, but gardeners have also used natural indicators for generations. One of the best-known signals is the flowering of forsythia. When those bright yellow flowers open across roadsides and gardens, soil conditions are often approaching the range associated with crabgrass germination. Forsythia does not replace an actual soil temperature reading, but it can serve as a useful reminder that the spring application window is opening. At that stage, you may have only a limited period to spread corn gluten meal before large numbers of summer annual weed seeds begin germinating. Apply too early, and the active effect may weaken before the main germination period. Apply too late, and many seedlings may already have roots beyond the vulnerable stage. The fall application follows the same principle. Winter annual weeds such as henbit, chickweed, and annual bluegrass often begin germinating as late summer heat gives way to cooler nights. In many regions, that means applying in late August or early September, shortly before those favorable fall conditions arrive. Local climate still matters, so soil conditions and regional weed patterns should guide the exact timing. Two carefully timed applications, one in spring and one in late summer or early fall, can create a useful layer of prevention against many annual weeds. The goal is not to chase every weed after it appears. The goal is to meet the seed at its weakest moment, before it develops the roots needed to survive and reach the sunlight. Part 4. The 5-day dry window gamble. Even with perfect timing, corn gluten meal still depends on one more critical condition: the weather. I call it the 5-day dry window, and it requires patience. After spreading the golden meal, lightly water the lawn or allow a brief, gentle rain within 24 hours. This moisture helps the active compounds move into the upper soil, where weed seeds are beginning to germinate. Then the soil needs several dry days. Avoid heavy rain, sprinklers, and irrigation for about 4 to 5 days. If the soil stays constantly wet, young weeds may survive long enough for the active effect to weaken. Because corn gluten meal also contains nitrogen, those surviving seedlings may benefit from the nutrients and grow more vigorously. During a dry period, however, the emerging roots remain poorly developed, and the seedling cannot obtain enough water to survive. It dries out before becoming established. That is why I always check the forecast before applying. If several rainy days are coming, I wait. A light watering followed by 4 or 5 dry, sunny days is the window I look for. Successful gardening is not only about what we apply to the soil, it is also about learning to work with the sky. Part 5. The Rhizosphere Symphony. When we judge a lawn only by its color or mowing lines, we overlook the place where plant health truly begins: the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is the narrow zone of soil surrounding plant roots. It is filled with bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and other organisms that help cycle nutrients and influence root growth. Some synthetic lawn treatments may control weeds effectively, but repeated use does not automatically improve soil structure or biological activity. When lawn care depends only on quick chemical control, the underlying problems, compaction, weak roots, bare soil, and poor nutrient cycling, often remain. Corn gluten meal works differently because it is a protein-rich organic material. Soil microorganisms break those proteins into smaller compounds and gradually release nitrogen for the grass. Over time, greater biological activity and added organic material can support better soil structure. Improved soil allows water to move more evenly, oxygen to reach the root zone, and grass roots to grow deeper. The goal is not simply to stop weeds for one season. It is to create dense, healthy turf that leaves fewer open spaces where weed seeds can establish. The strongest long-term weed defense is living soil beneath a thick, deeply rooted lawn. Part 5. The Rhizosphere Symphony. When we judge a lawn only by its color or mowing lines, we overlook the place where plant health truly begins: the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is the narrow zone of soil surrounding plant roots. It is filled with bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and other organisms that help cycle nutrients and influence root growth. Some synthetic lawn treatments may control weeds effectively, but repeated use does not automatically improve soil structure or biological activity. When lawn care depends only on quick chemical control, the underlying problems, compaction, weak roots, bare soil, and poor nutrient cycling, often remain. Corn gluten meal works differently because it is a protein-rich organic material. Soil microorganisms break those proteins into smaller compounds and gradually release nitrogen for the grass. Over time, greater biological activity and added organic material can support better soil structure. Improved soil allows water to move more evenly, oxygen to reach the root zone, and grass roots to grow deeper. The goal is not simply to stop weeds for one season. It is to create dense, healthy turf that leaves fewer open spaces where weed seeds can establish. The strongest long-term weed defense is living soil beneath a thick, deeply rooted lawn. Part 6. The liquid shield, ammonium sulfate, and molasses. You may be looking at compacted alkaline soil and yellowing grass and wondering whether there is a faster way to encourage improvement. One commonly used option is ammonium sulfate, sometimes combined with blackstrap molasses. Ammonium sulfate typically contains about 21% nitrogen and 24% sulfur. Its nitrogen is readily available, so it can produce a faster response than slow-release organic materials. The ammonium form carries a positive charge and can bind to negatively charged clay and organic matter. This helps keep more nitrogen in the root zone, although correct application rates and watering are still important. The sulfur can also be useful in alkaline soils. When soil pH is too high, nutrients such as iron may become less available, causing pale or yellow grass even when nitrogen is present. Soil bacteria gradually convert sulfur compounds into forms that can acidify the root zone, helping improve micronutrient availability over time. Blackstrap molasses supplies simple carbohydrates that soil microorganisms can use as an energy source. It does not directly feed the grass like a complete fertilizer, but it may temporarily stimulate microbial activity. Together, ammonium sulfate provides quick nitrogen, sulfur supports gradual acidification, and molasses supplies carbon for soil organisms. This method should still be used carefully because excessive nitrogen or sulfur can damage grass and disturb soil chemistry. Part 7. Grassy weeds and the synthetic treadmill. To manage weeds successfully, we must first identify what is growing. Broadleaf weeds and grassy weeds do not respond to the same treatments. Dandelion, clover, and chickweed have broad leaves and may respond to certain selective or contact products. Grassy weeds are harder because they resemble the lawn itself. Dallas grass is a coarse perennial with broad leaves and tall seed heads. Goosegrass favors compacted soil and bare areas, producing flat, spoke-like seed heads. Bahia grass is recognized by its Y-shaped seed head, while carpetgrass produces a similar head with an additional small branch. Annual foxtail has a fuzzy seed head and often shows a reddish base. These differences matter because no single herbicide is safe or effective on every turf species. Products containing ingredients such as atrazine must be used only on grasses specifically listed on the label. Applying the wrong product to the wrong lawn can cause yellowing, injury, or turf loss. Combination products may also include insecticides such as bifenthrin, even when insects are not the main problem. That can increase cost and chemical exposure without improving the soil conditions that allowed weeds to invade. Chemical products can be useful when chosen carefully, but they should not replace good lawn management. Compacted soil, weak turf, low mowing, poor drainage, and bare patches will continue inviting weeds. The most dependable strategy is to combine correct identification with suitable treatment, improved soil, proper mowing, deeper roots, and denser grass. Otherwise, lawn care becomes a repeated cycle of buying another product without ever correcting the cause. Part 8. The Miracle of Compound Interest. This is where the natural approach with corn gluten meal reveals its real strength. It is not a quick fix. It is a long-term system built on biological compound interest, where every season's improvement helps create even better results in the next. I want to be completely honest about what happened when I moved away from routine synthetic treatments and used corn gluten meal on my own lawn for 3 years. This was not an overnight transformation. It was a gradual journey of rebuilding the turf and improving the soil beneath it. In the first year, I applied corn gluten meal in early April, around the time the forsythia began blooming, at approximately 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. The results were encouraging, but they were not miraculous. I estimated a 40 to 50% reduction in crabgrass compared with the previous season. Dandelions still appeared because they were already mature, and corn gluten meal does not eliminate established weeds. I treated those plants separately with careful spot applications of ferrous sulfate. At first, I felt disappointed and wondered whether returning to conventional products would be easier. But I understood that biological lawn care takes time, so I stayed with the process and made another application in September. During the colder months, I noticed far fewer fall germinating weeds, with a reduction of roughly 60%. In the second year, the lawn began to change more clearly. The organic nitrogen from the previous applications had helped the grass grow thicker and develop deeper roots. Bare patches became smaller, leaving fewer open places where weed seeds could contact the soil. When the forsythia bloomed again, I made the next spring application. That season, the difference was much more noticeable. Crabgrass declined dramatically compared with the first year, and the lawn began taking on the appearance of a dense, healthy carpet. Many weed seeds could no longer reach exposed soil, while those that germinated during the active window faced the root-inhibiting effect of the corn gluten meal. By the third year, the benefits had compounded. In an area that had once held hundreds of crabgrass plants, I found only a handful. The turf had become so dense and vigorous that weeds struggled to find enough bare ground to become established, even without relying entirely on the pre-emergent effect. This is the most important lesson I want you to remember. Biological lawn care can become more effective over time, because each season builds on the one before it. When lawn care depends only on repeated chemical control, we often fight the same battle year after year. With corn gluten meal and other soil-supporting practices, we are working to build a stronger ecosystem. Each properly timed application serves two purposes. It may interfere with the early rooting of certain germinating weeds, while also feeding established grass and supporting biological activity in the soil. Better-fed grass becomes thicker. Thicker grass leaves less bare soil. Less bare soil gives weed seeds fewer opportunities to establish. The preventive effect and the fertilizing effect reinforce each other. Over time, the lawn becomes more capable of defending itself through density, deeper roots, and healthier soil. After several years, some lawns may require fewer applications, depending on climate, weed pressure, turf condition, and soil fertility. The real savings come not from chasing a miracle, but from reducing repeated treatments by building a lawn that is naturally more resilient. Conclusion: the wisdom of the soil. As this journey comes to an end, I want us to step back and consider the larger lesson. Caring for a garden, a lawn, or a small farm is never only about the plants we grow. It also reflects how we solve problems and how we choose to work with the natural world. The quick-fix mindset focuses on immediate control. When something unwanted appears, the first reaction is often to attack it, remove it, and force the landscape to behave exactly as we want. That approach may provide fast results, but when we ignore weak soil, poor drainage, compaction, bare areas, and unhealthy roots, the original problem usually returns. A biological approach follows a different path. It requires patience, observation, and respect for natural timing. With corn gluten meal, we are using a simple agricultural byproduct to help discourage some newly germinating weeds while nourishing the established grass we want to strengthen. The focus is not entirely on destruction. It is on building health, density, and resilience. Season after season, that investment can compound until the turf becomes thick enough and the soil supportive enough that many weeds simply lose the opportunity to take hold. There is also a meaningful lesson here for everyday life. How often do we spend our energy fighting the weeds within our own lives? Worry, unhealthy habits, conflict, and distraction, only to watch them return. What might happen if we spent more time cultivating the grass instead? What if we nourished our minds, strengthened our relationships, and gave more attention to the work and experiences that bring genuine purpose? Perhaps we could build lives so full of healthy growth that worry and distraction would find far less empty ground in which to take root. The next time you walk across a lawn or hold a handful of dark, living soil, remember what this simple corn byproduct can teach us. Lasting change rarely comes from force alone. More often it grows through nourishment, patience, and consistent care. Trust the long process, respect nature's timing, feed what you want to grow, and give unwanted things fewer places to establish. Thank you for spending this time with me, here on Earthly Delights. If this journey gave you useful knowledge, fresh encouragement, or a new way to think about your soil, subscribe to the channel Share your own gardening experience in the comments, and send this video to someone who could use a little more green in their life. Until next time, keep your hands in the soil, your eyes on the sky, and gentle care in everything you grow. I'll see you in the next one.